Hi, and a very warm welcome to the Sovereign Free Life podcast. I have the honor to be here with Professor Dolores Cahill, a dear, dear friend and one of the bravest people I know, honestly, that has such a sense of integrity and honesty in everything you do. Like, no matter what, you won't waver. And I deeply respect that. And you're also have been deep into the scientific world, and you know the pros and the cons of that world, what's going on there. And you're also very knowledgeable in the areas of sovereignty and law and co-ops. You have supported so many people out there. You've done amazing work. Also, as the president of the World Freedom Alliance, we've been working closely together there, and now also moving into the areas of health hubs and cooperatives, and really supporting people on the ground level with entrepreneurship. And I couldn't even say everything you've been doing in the past. You've been like advisor to top leaders in the world and the EU, and been doing amazing research in molecular biology and immunology. So yeah, Dolores, would love to let people get to know you a bit and let them know a little bit about your background, and also what conclusions you've come to and what led you to where you are now. So the word is yours.
Oh, thank you, Manika. And maybe can I just say, I'm sure everybody listening to compliment you, Manika, and your family and your father on all the work that you've been doing since we've met really in 2020. So I wouldn't really have been able to do many of the things I did, particularly in the World Freedom Alliance with you as chair, and that we really brought it to fruition together back in
Oh, I'm
2020.
tearing up. We've been through so much together.
We have, but I am extremely grateful. And I think, as we were talking about yesterday, to prepare for this, I really prefer to work with people. I really, and I think I wouldn't have been able to do a fraction of what we've done together without your support and
Oh.
your knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Dolores, and the same to you.
Yeah. And it's great. I think what we were discussing that people may not be aware, but I have not been on, I was only really on Telegram and was never on social media before 2020, kind of deliberately.
Mm,
But I have been by choice not really on social media or posting for the last 18 months or so. And the reason for that was that, in a way, I think it's gone beyond the stage of just talking about the problems. And I said to myself that really I would come back when I had a network of people that are really focused on the solutions. And
mm,
so that's why I'm very happy, Monica, to do this podcast with you, because I now see a pathway through the solutions. And in the last year or so, I've actually been very honored and asked to lead a peace, reconciliation, and prosperity initiative in Ireland that was set up in 1950. And that really resonated with me because I think we it's the name of it from the 1950s is peace, reconciliation, and prosperity. And I think in a way they're all the elements that we've been doing in the World Freedom Alliance. And
mm,
I'm happy whichever we decide to focus on. But I now see that countries like Ireland and Sweden, that we have a grassroots network, all of
mm,
us now, and that the next phase is that we work with people who really have been successful in their communities
mm.
and in their countries, and that we build momentum from the network. So that's why I'm very happy to go into what we've been doing, but just to frame it that I
Mm.
am extremely positive because all my life, and we can go into it since my childhood, and my father and grandparents, and in Tipperary, everybody saw the problem developing, and then we had access to how the undermining of countries and families and communities and education was going to happen in the decades to come. And then all of us have lived through this all our lives. Some people are only really becoming aware of it. But I
Mm,
think it's incumbent on us to really be the pathfinders for the solution, because you actually don't need to know all about the problem. The solutions are actually really easy. So that's what I'm focusing on now, is
mm,
solutions and developing with people who have co-ops, who are farmers, who have networks, and who are in a way doers and entrepreneurial, that
mm.
we can incentivize and motivate people and bring back hope that the solutions are actually available and they're not that difficult to do.
Definitely. And I know we want to focus on the solutions now, but I think it would be great to tell people a bit about your background, like what led you to actually focusing on the areas that you have, like your professional areas, and also the ways that you've moved forward with that. Because I know in Ireland there were terrible things going on like growing up, and I think, like we discussed yesterday actually, we had a conversation where it seems in a way that um that the same things keep on repeating themselves, just in a different shape and form, to kind of let people think that this is not the same. But when you have kind of more a helicopter view, it's, you can see that it's the same kind of principles that just repeat themselves. So I would love to hear that, um, because like you say, then the solutions, those are the ones that go to the root of the problems, not just letting this repeat itself over and over. But can you just tell a little bit about your upbringing, like what you've been through in the past? Because I think it's important also.
Okay, sure. Because as you know, I generally focus on the positives and the
I
future.
know. I
But
know.
that's okay. So I guess maybe one of the things that, of course, I was a child, maybe around 7, and in one springtime, so we grew up on a beautiful farm in a beautiful valley. The name of the town was called the Vale of Honey, and the mountain which you've been to, Slievenamon and Tipperary, is absolutely, it was a stunning place to live. And there actually was, it's hard to describe, but a resonance of joy and love. And
Mm.
when I went to school in Kilcash, which was a couple of miles away, and we'd walk home. And for what happened to us, as for generations, is the neighbors would come out as the children were coming home from school, and we'd have a chat with everybody. That's what everybody did. And we knew like hundreds of families, and it was beautiful. But when I was around maybe 7 or so, and none of the calves or the animals would have died on our farm. It was a beautiful place, and we really loved our animals. But in one springtime, all of the calves were born dead on our farm, and some of them had 2 heads
Oh, that's
or two,
terrible.
but they were born dead, but they were malformed. And then other farmers were reporting this. So one farmer that lived about a mile away from us, um, all of his adult animals died, all of his young animals died, and all of his pets died, and his entire family started to be sick. Now, what happened in the valley was Merck Sharp and Dome was a big pharmaceutical industry, and they just had an incinerator, and obviously the incinerator came on, and then all of the animals were either deformed or whatever. So
Mm.
that then, in a way, there was about 200, we'll say, families, farming families affected, 200 or 300, and the awareness, or the uncovering of what went on happened really over a generation. It took about 20 years. So from when I was a very young child, um, some of the farmers then decided, it was obvious in a way to us what had happened, but when it was reported to the departments, the local councils, the regulatory authorities, the police, the veterinary medicine institutes, samples were taken, the community was not listened to. Yes, and then I suppose what happened next then, so this happened for about 15 years, so from when I was about 7 until I was around 21. And what we found in the first few years was that the farmers that spoke up about the issues were had really many elements of the state go against them. And it included the journalists and then like the tax people and the police. And then there were campaigns against them to say that the people were speaking out, that there was something wrong with them. And also that will say they were not. So what they did was, in a very clever psychological way, which they do now in a lot of the issues that we see in society, is make two opposing sides that are, that will say the farmers were anti-employment in Merck Sharp and Dome, or anti-research and development, even though they, of course, they weren't, but they just didn't want poison so that their livelihood would be
Yeah,
taken.
of
So,
course.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
And then, so that was very interesting. So as the years went on, only maybe less than 10 farmers out of hundreds of farmers continued to support John Hanrahan. And my father and grandmother were one of the farming families that when the calves died or animals died, that we paid at our own expense for vets to come to take samples in order to show in his court cases, because the argument against him was that he was the only farmer affected. But what they did was they went around systematically intimidating farmers. And this also went through like the Department of Agriculture type format and the banking system. And there was companies like Avonmore that took the milk, and many farmers were milk farmers. And Avonmore said, if you speak out against Merck Sharp and Dome, we won't take your milk, while publicly pretending that there was no issue.
Mm.
So that then led to many farmers having no money to pay their bills. And then in the 1980s, in the valleys, the banks then moved in and were forcing auctions to bankrupt the farmers that spoke out against the factory. And my father was already involved in like the National Farmers Association and the IFA, but he was involved with many other farmers to try and ensure that the estate agents and auctioneers and banks that were not recognizing that there was a problem with Merck Sharp and Dome, but trying to remove farmers from the valley, that information was exposed, and that farmers would work together and not try and buy each other's farms in a competitive way, and that worked very well. So, but it was, it was a very psychologically manipulative 15 years. And because our family and the neighboring families, we all actually got on very well and knew each other for generations, it allowed us to really observe how or particularly me, how the propaganda was working, how Merck Sharp and Dome was working, how they were giving grants and things to local communities, buying people off. So it was a system of threats and rewards. So if you spoke out against it, your livelihood was threatened. You ended up having to interact with the state through police or through, like, I think my father back then got the equivalent of a 1-year tax bill of like £500,000, £60,000, which would have been like 10 times our gross income, and that was then enforced. So it allowed me to see, but of course, and I was in Macronaferma, and we used to go into Merck Sharp and Dome, as farming organizations, young farmers, and then I would ask them, in the tour that they did every year, but ask them like, what are you doing about it? And there was like an omerta, it was very revealing. All the people who worked in it, nobody wanted to talk about it,
Yeah.
So what happened then, which was a learning for me then, was that of course I was only a little kid, you know what I mean? It wasn't like I was just a little kid going to wherever I'm following my father in the car and just sitting there at the meetings. Nobody paid any attention. So it's not like I wasn't involved in, I was just observing because I was very interested in the future. I really saw it just the way I was born, we'll say, that I could. And then the other skill that I have is that I can sense when people are lying,
Mm.
but in a kind of a visceral way. you know, when you are shocked, it's like when you meet sociopaths or psychopaths, you know, which
Mm.
they're around us, and that they blatantly lie. And then you just look around and everyone else is just, you know, has no intuition about what's going on. But I would just be, but I could actually, but from my reaction without saying anything, people who are lying, they kind of know, you know, that you're kind of questioning just by looking at them, like, you know, what the hell. So I actually then was very interested, and I knew that it was my life's journey. So my father was involved, you know, many farmers were. He was just in a way an ordinary farmer, but he had like beautiful skills of patience, and he was very warm-hearted, and he was very good naturally at mediating. So
Mm.
we grew up in an old house that was beautiful and was built in 1776. But in my childhood, we always had neighbors in, you know, like we had a sitting room and a kitchen, and not every evening, but like a few times every week, there'd be a couple of farmers in just discussing, as my father would go to other families and chat about things. So what I learned then in those was say 15, 20 years was I followed the case that the farmers were taking
Mm.
just to have an investigation into the poisoning and the death and the increase in ill health, and
Mm.
later on cancers and infertility in the valley, right?
Yeah.
And he lost the cases in the lower courts over like 10 years and essentially was bankrupted, not officially bankrupted, but essentially his livelihood. And then he was also, as some of us were as families, kind of ostracized, you know,
Mm.
not exactly entirely ostracized, but a bit like the COVID-19 thing, that people didn't really want to talk about it. And then in the years that followed those, when he lost the case, it was like, you know, people would be polite, but almost like, well, we're not going to go there. Let's not talk about
Mm.
the Merck Sharp and Dohme. Yeah. So very similar psychologically to what's happened in the last few years. So then, though, I really studied the legal system, the law, and my grandmother was born in 1886 and my grandfather in 1884. So she was 30 years old in 1916. And my father was involved, or my grandfather, who I never met, was involved in the sovereignty freedom movement. And he stood for election for the Irish Republican Brotherhood, Sinn Féin, in 1918 in Tipperary. And there wasn't that many people that stood for election. So he was essentially networked and knew, and she knew, the people that successfully proclaimed the sovereignty of Ireland, or Eire, in 1916 successfully, and it was internationally recognized. And then they set up through the Irish Republican Brotherhood and later IRB Sinn Féin, because the British Empire decided they would shoot anyone and kill people who were members of the IRB. But in the so that what they did was develop policies that were world leading and actually still are around banking and education, you know, and health and how societies work, property ownership. But the most important thing that those generations of people developed was a system of accountability, mediation, and justice, ending up in the sovereign Dáil Éireann courts, they were called, but essentially it was lawful trial by jury with 12 men and women, and that no one was above the law.
Mm.
And it was the knowledge of the law and the ancient knowledge of law for thousands of years in Ireland that I learned, as well as Bahain Law, and then an intimate understanding of the legal system and why John Hanrahan's cases failed in the lower courts. And eventually he also lost in the High Court in Ireland, but he won in the Supreme Court in 1988, including
Wow.
around defending his inalienable rights to his lawful rights.
Mm.
Um, and so that in a way was my background. And of course, you
Mm.
know, what I also experienced in 1982 was that two people came from Merck Sharp and Dohme and had a meeting in our house and said to my father and to us is that if he stopped supporting John Hanrahan, that myself and another member of our family, our fees would be paid in University College Cork for whatever we wanted to do. Now, of course, they knew that we were being targeted by the tax authorities and the government, and that, and of course, my father, we just looked at each other and said, of course, we're not going to take the money. And because of that, because, we were going to do the right thing, that actually at 15, 16, 17, and 18, I traveled in Germany and from 7 in the morning till 7 at night as a teenager worked picking out rotten gherkins in a gherkin factory in Germany in order to earn the money to go to university.
Oh,
Because
wow. Mm,
well, that's, but no one would ever know that, right?
mm,
Whereas if we had just said, okay, we'll take that, our fees paid in UCC, if we did not continue to give evidence and support
mm,
John Hanrahan, we would have been bought off.
mm.
You know what I mean? So that was, and of course, what we said, I said, I was quite articulate at the time, and I was winning debating competitions and things.
I can imagine. Yes.
You can imagine. So I said to the two guys in suits from Merck Sharp and Dome, why are you coming here trying to silence us and bribe us? Why are you not investigating why the calves are dying and
Mm,
born with two heads? Because I said whatever's happening to the animals very quickly is going to end up destroying the health or the fertility of people in the valley.
mm, mm,
And I said to them, did they think there would be an increase in overall disease and cancer and infertility in the future? Well, first of all, I asked about that and they said yes. And I said, do you think, what about fertility issues? Because if there are deformities
mm,
and they agreed with me,
mm,
right? But they
mm.
had no qualms. Do you know what I mean? So that's in
Yeah.
a way, and that's what you and I have experienced and many people. These are civil service type people
Mm,
that are essentially engaged in criminal activities.
mm.
Do you know what I mean? They're
Definitely.
actually
And I
trying
think
to,
I think we kind of
yeah.
share that. I mean, I had my experience growing up with my father where he would find cures and treatments for so many different diseases, and then experience the same kind of bashing, the media going after him, being compromised, being attacked, like terrible things happening for instance, just finding ways to cure back problems. No, but it's quite shocking when you see how the obvious things, you can see it with your eyes, the calves dying, and like my father treating people that have had pain for 30 years and they walk out completely well, and then like not getting the proper response and the proper support. And I think that's something, when you've seen it up front, you realize how complex the problem is and how a lot in society is not taking care of the people on the ground any longer, right? And like listening to them and protecting them like a society should. Yes, so seeing this, like how did I guess it was a training for you as well, right? It was an education in a way. How did you decide to move forward from there? And what was your passion? What was your interest in, like what were doing moving forward?
Yeah, so I think as well, just to give it the context, is that my grandmother, my father was a really natural teacher, and he had done a huge amount of research. And it really opened my eyes. And our family would have, different families would be known for different skills, in those communities. So one of the things that our family were in is that we had a love of education, and learning and teaching. So I have two sisters and they're both teachers. And it's a kind of, my father was a natural teacher and he had a love of learning. So and also that we would debate, so that was much more common. But I think what I learned growing up, and my grandmother, of course, was a beautiful, serene lady, very positive. But also, if you asked her something, she would give you an answer, which was very insightful. And then from her answers, you realize that, we'll say, for example, the so-called in 1845 to 1850, I think this is a good one to reveal how deep the lies run, that even in the 1970s, and still the case, we were taught, the world was taught there was a potato famine in Ireland. But the reality is we had around 8.5 or 9 million people in 1845. And 5 years later, in 1850, we had 4 million people. Now, Ireland is a naturally temperate climate. You know, it never gets, there's not like snows, not like Sweden. And it's absolutely abundant in food and in fishing. And, you know, we have a very rich agricultural repertoire and farmers. So it's very, and what happened was that 4 million people starved to death. Now, that has been taught in our schools still, that one potato crop failed. And it turns out that that is a complete lie. But even in the 1970s, so there were people, so my grandmother was born in 1886. So when she was an adult, the people 30 years older than her would have actually lived through those times. So they would know exactly what happened. And then she told me what happened. And still in the schools today and in the archives of our country and in the universities, they are saying it is one crop, but the reality was that the British Empire, or the Crown, City of London, was in all around the world in that time, you know, in their empire. And they had 60% of all of the military in the world were in Ireland in those years, ensuring that people were starved to death or murdered or accused of criminal activity, which they didn't do, in order to be deported out of Ireland. So to halve the population. And there's also psychological harm when there is a starvation, and the importance of family and of respecting the funeral process in Ireland is very ancient. And because there were so many deaths and people were so sick and impoverished, there were many years where there were literally corpses along the roads in Ireland that couldn't be buried because people were so malnourished and unwell. And in a way, there is a resonance of that trauma. And what's, I think, even worse is that immediately it was lied about, and then that we are still been lied about that, our history. And that's only 2 or 3 generations ago. And when there were people alive, it was absolutely taught in history books and in the universities and in the education system as a potato famine. So it's not just that I suddenly saw Merck Sharp and Dome, that we were actually aware that, you know, the real history, I mean, you know, that would be like the equivalent in the United States of America now of 150 million people dying, half the population. And within 1 or 2 generations that people say, well, it was because, you know, some corn failed, when there was huge military operations killing people, and they had a system of undermining justice through the legal system and the City of London, where they were falsely accusing people of criminal activity and literally putting them in prison or sending them away from Ireland for years or essentially murdering them. So so the depth of the lies is very deep, and it's not a subtle thing.
But what you're talking about, I think, really highlights that this has been going on for a long time. You know, the corruption that we're seeing, in the financial like bodies in the world, the government bodies. This is not like just a chance that it's ongoing still.
Yes, absolutely. So I know we keep having a little bit of internet, Monica, but it's great to be back. So just to say, what I was saying is what this experience on Merck Sharp and Dome, you know, in Tipperary from the mid 70s until 1988, that in that process, and because my father and grandmother were trying to solve the problems, you know, and had lots of meetings, and that they would put this into a historical context. And because we have a love of education, and we had a lot of books, you know, when I grew up, and in our network, we met with historians and people that I was exposed to a lot of books, but also to the oral history, you know, of what happened. And actually, I had a beautiful aunt that was a nun, and she used to come back once a year And then she would visit all of our neighbors. So I would trot along with her and then, hear a lot of the history, which was really good.
Oh, beautiful.
And I also had a great interest, though, in justice, you know what I mean, as a natural. And what, of course, was going on was blatant, blatant injustice. And then at the same time, we had the issues in Northern Ireland, where,
Mm,
and I learned from the history of the IRB that the divisions in Northern Ireland were actually instigated.
mm,
You know what I mean? They were engineered, and that three people, um, Rudyard Kipling and Lord Rothschild, bought 136,000 weapons in 1912, and essentially started off the movement in the north to murder Catholics in 1912 in order to create division.
mm,
And the North, or Ulster, was actually one of the most important seats of our culture and our tradition and of the sovereignty of Ireland. So they essentially engineered. And then in 1913, the Irish Republican movement responded to that in order to defend themselves lawfully. And the IRB had been set up in 1858 and had, a constitution, including in 1889, where they said that people had to stand for election.
mm,
And they then set up what became Ogla na HÉireann. And Ogla na HÉireann is still today the defense forces, the army and the police, but also the Irish Republican Brotherhood and Common na Mon. So essentially, they then proclaimed the independence of the nation in 1916. And then in 1918, in December, they had a all-country 32-county election in 1918, where the Irish Republican Brotherhood won 3/4 of the election. So that was all men and women. And that election was recognized as being free and fair. And then in January 1919, the IRB set up a government based on that election and set up the defense forces, the police, and the lawful arms of government, and also importantly set up the trial by jury system, which was called the Sovereign Dáil Éireann Courts.
mm, mm,
Just to get back to why that's important is that the police in Ireland and the army and the Department of Finance actually, when on the websites even now, trace back their underpinnings from January 1919.
mm,
What happened after that was the Crown, from the City of London under the guise of the British military, then came in the years to follow. And essentially, Ireland was set up for division, including with Winston Churchill, to divide Ireland and families under the guise of a treaty. But they essentially then created a civil war, which we have mapped out exactly how it was done. And then the British military, funded by the Crown and the City of London, came in and essentially went around and murdered everybody involved in the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and especially those who stood for election. So the house that my family had grown up in Knockgraffon in Tipperary for many, many generations, was burned to the ground by the Black and Tans in the middle of the night in order to kill my grandfather and my grandmother, who was pregnant with my father at the time, and there was two young little sisters that my father had. But it was deliberately done to ensure that people would not support the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and that it would have to become a secret organization because it was blatant killing. And then the leaders of that were targeted and were murdered, including Michael Collins, that was murdered as part of the Civil War. And it was so psychologically engineered that families, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, were on different sides of that so-called civil war, which was
mm,
essentially one or two generations that decided to not speak about it, but
mm,
in a very insidious way. So very similar to the one or two generations who decided, because of the trauma of the Holocaust, that
mm,
they also wouldn't really speak about it. They were so traumatized, and not to pass on any kind of division to the next generation. And
mm,
then one or two generations later, we had this so-called engineered civil war, which people also didn't talk about. And that left a vacuum for
mm,
the miseducation that is still going on today.
mm, mm,
But when you have, so what I'm very honored to do now as part of, I've been involved in the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and I'm very honored to do it. But what we're meeting now is many hundreds of people around Ireland whose families over multiple generations, the same as my family, were just ordinary farmers or ordinary workers that just wanted Ireland to be sovereign.
mm,
And it is a republic, but also to have an accountability mechanism of law where
mm,
you have a trial by jury system. And when you speak to these people over many generations, their families have been targeted, you know?
mm,
So that, and I think it's that kind of history. And of course, I am now as part of the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process, having meetings every second week now at different locations across Ireland. And what we're doing is really building a network of people who have shown by their resilience over decades
mm,
and their ancestors, their fathers and grandparents, that they just want a system in Ireland, and we can mirror it in other countries, where people are not targeted for exposing things that are harming people or harming animals, and that if people who are civil servants or public servants are actually abusing their role and position
mm,
to target whistleblowers, essentially, or people trying to ensure that the wrong is exposed and people are held accountable, that we've actually forming a network. And as part of the reconciliation process, we are reaching from, you know, all corners of Ireland to
mm,
develop a vision for Ireland, and then to develop a mechanism to actually restore what we had less than 100 years ago. And the solution to many of the problems that we have is to have a system where no one is above the law,
mm,
and a sovereign Dáil courts, which would be known across the world as a trial by jury system, where people are innocent until proven guilty. But it doesn't matter who you are in those things, that if you are, you know, the head of the regulatory system, or if you are involved in the police, that if you are abusing your role, that you can actually be held to account. And we can do that by working together to have precedence examples.
mm,
That,
mm,
so we're now, I think, in the most amazing time to be alive, because what we see is that people whose loved ones, you know, died within an hour of going into hospital, that were perfectly healthy in their 50s and died, or people who dropped dead, that the coroners will say are not doing their role properly. And we've seen it in the last month in Ireland, where people want to go in to see a coroner's inquisition, that they, just normal people or journalists, that they have been arrested and put in prison, and the courts or the coroner's courts have been, the doors have been closed, multiple police not allowing anyone in.
mm,
So I think the process may take another couple of years, but in 5 years, definitely, we will not have a position where there is an abuse of the police force against people who just want to have transparency and accountability in the roles of the physicians and the police and the coroners. And the way to do that is to have a jury service for people over 18, and then to re-establish the jury service where, you know, that it actually works in the lawful mechanism, as
mm, mm,
opposed to the legal system that's operating now.
mm. Because the big problem is that we're seeing the same um things repeating itself. We haven't come to the root of the problems yet. It's the same in Sweden, where I know in the government agency, like that is like the FDA in the US, like the it's mostly funded by the pharmaceutical companies, and there's most of people that have government positions are deeply involved in other big companies. So it's almost like when the system serves big companies or the money or those kind of things instead of the people, what do we do? Like a lot of people criticize me and others for like, but this is dangerous, you're going out of the system. No, we're actually just respecting the real fundamental values that have been there for thousands of years. This is not threatening anyone. This is, like you said, it's the peace, reconciliation, knowing that the truth is the foundation of a society. Like me, having studied society and human ecology and international relations, I know this very well, that if those principles of like real law and truth and having respect for that integrity is not present, all of society crumbles like we're actually seeing today. And then the trust for those institutions, they are diminished. And of course they are if they're not living up to their role. I mean, it's all logic in a way. But how do you see the transition then from, because I know we talked about that, it's almost like people having a mist in front of them. They're like a brainwash almost, like just of fear, because like I think the history that we've all been going through, we've had it all over the world, I think, of these power hubs in the world, using that power to like diminish our belief in ourselves and create a lot of fear mentality and a lot of conflict being used to split us. And it's like the oldest trick in the book, and still people are not getting it. Like, how can we describe that and also show that, just like we were discussing the other day, if people would just put maybe 1-2 hours per day to like maybe to move forward and to believe in themselves and know what's possible, it would make such a difference, you know.
So absolutely. So I
That was
totally
my
agree
little
with
rant here, but
No, 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 it's good. And I'm really happy, Manika, because you know what I think I've said it already is that I certainly want to not do things on my own. You know what I mean? And I'm very honored that you exist and that you're there because it's really strengthens me that when we speak, we both have decades, like your wonderful father and his ancestors, right? That we have this knowing, and it may be that the majority of people around us for all of our lives just presume that we're not right. You know, of course, we can be wrong about things, but this fundamental aspect about that no one is above the law, what it is, Manika, is that when we come from a family and a community where people really know their history and they have actually been themselves, like your father was, and you have been, and your ancestors and my ancestors, that over years that we actually meet the journalists or the people from Merck Sharp and Dome or the people dressed up as police or the tax people or the Department of Agriculture, or you know, people will say trying to prevent me talking about prevention and treatment by all kinds of allegations or whatever over decades. You know, so really what we have, you and I, is about 100 years of first-hand experience or directly talking to people who have seen the generations of people in those roles intimidating directly us or our immediate family or our ancestors. So that when people challenge us or say it doesn't work like that, we don't have to argue with them, but that we actually know how the intimidation works.
mm,
And then, so what we're doing now in Ireland through, you know, the networks and what we've been doing through the World Freedom Alliance and your sovereign freedom movement and my custodian and custodian institute, and then in the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and now in this peace, reconciliation, and prosperity, is that we now have met and regularly meet hundreds of people who are aware of the entire system of how it works in a hundreds of years or 200-year time span. And so what I think why that's very important is that, and we can talk about now what you and I are building now and in the
mm,
immediate months and years ahead,
mm,
is a network of people who understand how this system works. Some people, like I have done my whole life, researched in detail who is behind it. And when we give a lot of lectures, we go in because some people listening like to have that information about who's behind it, and we've given that. So one great book is The Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman, that was published in 1972, that you can get freely available from archive.org, and that goes into who's behind it. But I think what I want to be involved now is with people who want to develop the solutions,
mm,
because they actually have had for 50, 100 years a demoralization agenda.
mm,
And that runs through a lot of the education system and a lot of society in order to literally um, make individual men and women think that the problem is so big everywhere that there is no solutions, or even if there are solutions, a small number of people, or you as an individual, Josephine, Dolores, or Manika, that we cannot have any effective change. We
mm,
can't actually, they don't have any hope, and they
mm,
don't see any solutions. And they think that a small number of people can't affect solutions in our country.
mm,
And that is officially known as a demoralization agenda in their paperwork.
mm,
So what I've been working on for the last few years, and you have and we have together, is to, the solutions are actually very simple and they're easy to implement.
mm,
And what I'm proposing that we do is, and that have been doing now for the last few years, is that we network with the people who have the inner strength and resilience to actually do something themselves. So, like you say, it could be 3 hours a month, or it could be, 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week, that they actually make a conscious decision that they want to be involved in the solutions. And
mm,
then that you and I, with them, we will create a vision for, depending on how much time they have, that they can then decide, well, do I want to improve my own health? Or do I want to actually do an analysis of like property ownership? Because the agenda we're up against, their theme is you will own nothing, which is around, how much money you have and whether you own your property. Or do they want to be entrepreneurial? Or do they actually want to engage in some voluntary activity within their community?
mm,
And that what we're doing, and we're doing it quite effectively now in our networks, is just to say to people, well, we are actually, we know that the whole system, like a domino, will be sorted at many levels once we bring back the accountability for individual people like civil servants or people dressed as police or teachers, if they are accused by people of abusing their power or criminal activity. Yeah. So that's essentially just restoring the sovereign Dáil courts or the trial by jury system. And that will have a domino effect throughout society. And we know how to do it. And it's done, and we're doing it now through what's called precedence cases. So you
mm,
just need one family where a death certificate was falsified to
mm,
then have a situation where a coroner is held to account, and
mm,
that if 1,000 families are affected by that, that they can support 10 or 12 or 32 examples in 32 counties in Ireland. And if one coroner is then must accurately not falsify a death cert because that's a criminal offence, then that will resonate that the other death certs can be assessed and not falsified. And
mm,
that means the numbers and what went on over the last few years will then, in a historic time frame, be exposed.
mm,
It's
mm.
so I think what we're doing is just,
Mm,
giving people hope that it's not that difficult, But
Yeah.
then the other aspect that we can talk about is that we want the people who have volunteered and who have something to give into the network, that we then build a freedom economy or an enterprise network in the various example countries like Ireland and Sweden, and just motivate and encourage people to support businesses and enterprises that are either really effectively helping people be healthier or supporting them in their journey about restoring law or getting lawful access to their property, or pushing back on the assault against whistleblowers, or
Mm,
if someone had someone who died and they are sure that the death cert was not correct, that
mm.
they say, well, I'm going to dedicate some time to ensure that my death cert is correct in the future, or that anyone else in that hospital doesn't have to experience the lies that we're told, that people are held accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like over the years and also in the World Freedom Alliance and with our backgrounds and all the people we have met, it is quite clear what needs to happen, right? And what needs to be done. And actually, for a long, long time, even since I was very young and I started to also understand like the background of what was happening. Also, both, like I said, in my family, we also had honest, open discussions, like about everything. And people from the outside would like, oh my God, are you arguing? And we're like, no, we're discussing. Like, what's the problem? And, we need to just really understand that how powerful we all are in those actions, in those little actions. Like I know, we're working together around water. Just if it's the engagement in water and just bringing it all into the light. What is very obvious, like trusting your own senses, trusting that, I've tested my water at home, that you see that there are nitrates, that there are toxins in the water, and we need to deal with that. Like to really trust what you see and feel with your own eyes and not go into, in a way, kind of distracting yourself or buying into some conflicts or some lies, or maybe in the future it's all going to be solved by someone else. Like I hear that a lot. It's like, no, it's us, it's this community, it's us being together, understanding the power of relationships, of building things together. And I am completely certain that when we build what we want to see in the world, like you are doing, like I'm doing here in
Yeah.
Scandinavia, that will take over, and slowly that the transition will happen, instead of buying into the old stories of conflict, of war, of there's so much infiltration happening that we won't even go into that maybe today. But like you said, the same thing is happening. A lot of people that are on the front lines in the freedom movements are being attacked in different ways, me including. But it's like when we don't buy into the same story again and stop repeating that and build a solid base where we have our needs met, where we have our own financial transactions, where we have our own clear trial by juries, like all of those things. And it might seem a lot, but it's not. If we all, you know, just take one step in front of the other, we are going to get there. I'm
No, absolutely.
completely
So
certain.
no, it's absolutely, Manika. And I think, like in the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity, I'm working with people who themselves have whole networks, themselves. So one of the things that was proposed in one of the organizations, so when we have meetings, a lot of people themselves are in networks of hundreds and thousands of people. But one, as the basis for the trial by jury system, was a proposal to have a dispute resolution mechanism within all the individuals and all of the groups that are involved in this peace, reconciliation, and prosperity program. But we're focusing on reconciliation, this year for now. And
Mm,
that was a dispute resolution mechanism that was brought by one of the members or one of the groups. And then it was so it resonated, that if you have an issue, it just clearly says how it would be resolved by a mediator acceptable to both sides. Now, that's actually the way the sovereign Dáil Éireann courts worked in every, so they're called parishes here, but they essentially had in every parish, which would be maybe 1,000, 2,000 people, that the sovereign Dáil Éireann courts had a presence in every parish, and that if there was an issue, there would be essentially first go through arbitration and then mediation, and only if it couldn't be resolved would it have to go to where there would be an accusation and a trial by jury system in the community, which might be a larger network. We'll say if it was in Tipperary, you would have then the courts would meet, but they would be in the language, the lawful language of English or Irish, and that the accusation, you would be innocent until proven guilty, and it would be public, and the decision would be done by the 12 members of the jury, and then the people that would just administrators would be called justices or conveners, essentially like brehons.
Mm.
But what we've decided is, in a way, so this is just to show you how easy in a way it is to bring back the system of accountability, because once you have accountability, then the whole society resets itself very quickly. So what we've agreed is that we bring in this dispute resolution mechanism, which is essentially the arbitration and mediation mechanism of the system of accountability in Ireland. And we have now, that has been accepted, and we've actually used it within the last month or two.
Mm.
And what we've also said is that anyone who doesn't agree in a way cannot really be involved in the movement. If you don't agree that if you have an issue with someone to mediation, because why wouldn't you, in a way? You can choose the mediators. So in a way, what we've already done is set up the framework for what will become the system of justice across Ireland.
Mm.
And all of the documents are there, because we've essentially reestablished arbitration and mediation within communities. And so what we need to do now, or what is important, is that we just get the message out to hundreds of people initially in the next year. But I think that once we get a network of people who then, and I'm offering with people to train people in arbitration mediation, that then we can move to doing a fit for purpose audit on the current system of accountability and what is currently the legal system, just by looking at how they handle example cases. So in our network, there are now, many cases that are within the current court system where communities like of 35,000 people are actually challenging how the people that are paid as police are operating within their communities in the past year or two across Ireland, in order to find a mechanism within the current system. And if it is exposed, like I took a challenge around, my employer, University College Dublin, instigated proceedings of gross misconduct against me for exercising my right of freedom of speech, and that was on the 15th of March 2021. But because, like Dr. Anne McCluskey, who was a doctor and physician, she had 40 years unblemished record. And then in 2020, she was, I think, retired, but she went back because she thought that there was a real issue. So she went back to dedicate her time in Derry in the north of Ireland. And then she realized that there was, the hospitals were empty. And she then started to speak about what was actually happening in 2020. And she then has become targeted. And she also has criminal accusations against her for speaking out and for traveling. But she was actually arrested in June of 2024 because she stood for election. And she was arrested while she was canvassing for an election based on criminal accusations for her traveling and speaking in 2020 and put in prison
Oh,
this year. So
mm.
because what
It's
often
happening now
happens,
today. Yeah, the same kind of things of harassing,
yes,
that
but
challenge. Yeah.
absolutely. So because often what happens to Anne, because we worked very closely together for many years and we're friends, I then decided, because there are outstanding, there was, I think, 11 criminal accusations to put me in prison for 6 months each for doing my lawful duty of providing information, which I was required to do around alternatives like vitamin D and C and hydroxychloroquine, Nobel Prize winning treatments on the medicine, the world medicine list as the safest, that were already done in clinical trials and available for decades. So I had an obligation as a professor, obviously, and knowing the law, and a professor in the School of Medicine. And so my employer, University College Dublin, instigated proceedings against me on the 15th of March 2021 for gross misconduct, which and that went out into the newspapers about my private, situation. And then on the exact same day, the English government instigated proceedings to put me in prison for 10 years for speaking in Trafalgar Square, right? On the same day, though, the 15th of March 2021. And then and the address for that was Irish Freedom Party, which was a political party that I thought was on our side.
Mm.
And then they never told me about those criminal accusations, so I didn't go to defend myself, and then there was arrest warrants. Now, why that's important is that all happened on the same day,
Mm.
15th of March 2021, after I had done a video explaining how people could push back against the checkpoints in Ireland that came out on the 14th of March 2021. So because in June, Dr. Anne McCluskey was put in prison, I then instigate proceedings against University College Dublin and proceedings against the police to prevent them from their attacks on me, because, if they do put you in prison, it's very difficult to defend yourself. So I actually then, because I have never seen a lot of those warrants or summonses haven't been properly served, they've just been in the newspapers. And I put the proceedings in June into the High Court here. And High Court proceedings are confidential and you have a year to serve them. But 1 hour after I put in the proceedings against the police, I was contacted by a journalist from the Irish Independent. And the next day, it was a full-page article, all of the details of the proceedings, which I didn't serve until like weeks later.
Mm.
So what's important is that is an example of fit for purpose, right?
Mm.
Was it a criminal offense for me to give health information that proved to be correct?
Mm.
And what are the police doing, right? So in a way, what's been going on for the last few years is that it's like a juggernaut, that
Mm.
they are individuals that are sacrificing their careers and their incomes and their family life,
Mm.
are having the police and the journalists and the courts and their employers, and again, in my case, revenue, like I was due back money in 2019, 2020 from revenue, but they haven't actually administered. And I
Mm.
was entitled to a pension, which the tax authorities have not administered.
Mm.
Now, what my proceedings are about, and I'm happy to talk about them because this is how the system works, is there are many facets of the system to ensure that your reputation is destroyed and that you financially have no money and
Mm.
you're locked out of the banking system. And the journalists have a narrative to say that somehow we are anti whatever it is, when actually we're pro health and we're pro debate. So
Mm.
what I think is that what I'm saying within our networks is that really our experience is a fit for purpose analysis of the countries that we're living in. So essentially, my precedence case is actually an audit of, are the things that we pay for in society, are they fit for purpose?
Mm,
Now, fit for purpose is a lawful terminology that if you go into the High Court office on, the 16th or 17th of June 2024 to instigate the most confidential proceedings
mm,
in your country, because it's usually done if somebody like a wife was going to be threatened by her husband. The
mm,
wife would go in and instigate proceedings to say, in the event her attacker or abuser comes near her, that she can then instigate the safety measures.
mm, mm,
But that if they don't come near her, you don't antagonize the situation. So you have proceedings, but you keep them confidential for a year.
mm,
So what ended up in my example is that, is it correct that when you launch proceedings against, to do an analysis of the police and the Attorney General and the court service, that within an hour, the biggest newspaper contacts you and all the information is a full page the next day? Now,
mm,
that's not fit for purpose, but in a way, it is the system revealing itself,
mm,
right? Because that is not a fit for purpose. And if your employer makes false accusations against you because you are asserting your freedom of speech and academic freedom, and they successfully try and undermine your income and your reputation and your ability to earn a living and to pay back your mortgages, that is also not fit for purpose when we look at it in the historical perspective, as we've seen, like in Merck Sharp and Dome, or we've seen in the death of 50% of the population, or in the historical discrimination against Indigenous Irish people over hundreds of years. So I think that's what's really good now, is
mm,
that we have an absolute insight into the lack of accountability and how the system protects itself through abusing the powers of the police,
mm,
criminal accusations by the legal system, and then that when you do try and defend yourself, that they again use the arms of the taxation system.
mm, mm.
You know, the
Definitely.
the high
And
courts.
I think it's doesn't it boil down to every man and woman's decision to stay in integrity or not, in a way? Because whether or not you act as a police or a judge or journalist or wherever you are, I mean, I love you had a short video clip go viral just recently, I know, where you talked to some reporters
In
and
Sky News. Yeah.
asked them straight out, where were you? Why weren't you reporting the truth? Like, and that's, it's all coming up now. Like the truth will always win in the end. No, I think it really boils down to that, to stand in integrity, whatever role that you're in. But I see also it's so easy for many people to think that they walk a comfortable road by just conforming to the narrative, when exactly that behavior of choosing what they think is the easy way out in the long run will be the really hard way, because that lead us all as a society and as mankind down the completely wrong track. If you see what I mean, there is no comfort in conforming to something that is not integrity, that is not truth, and just buying into a general story of putting someone else in a box. That I think has happened to you a lot. It's like, oh, she's this and that, and I've had it too. Like you said, to write in the media when it's a very sensitive, important, deeply important issue of you exercising your fundamental rights of freedom of speech and travel. Like, you have never done any harm to anyone. I know that completely. You have just really taken that responsibility, and that can be uncomfortable sometimes. It can be a tough road, but in the long run, it is the easy road. That's when we create the positive. So thank you, Dolores, for doing that. And I know also that I mean, you are actually doing what you're talking about and living what you're talking about. You're setting an example, which I think a lot of us need to do, especially in these times, to understand that it does matter when you set an example. It does matter when you do the right thing, like no matter what happens, because I'm also really impressed by the Bahain Law. And because I was thinking while you were talking about, setting up these beautiful trial by juries and all of that, I think one criticism that comes from a lot of people is, well, how are you going to enforce that? How is that going to work? But as I understand it, when there is a mutual agreement and when there is reconciliation and where there has been harm done, you can see, but how can we make that right? That you don't really need that same kind of enforcement, right? Could you speak a bit about that and how that is like in this present day where we are? Because there's so much, from my view, there's so much uh, breaches of the truth and the law going on in society, and I think a lot of people are giving up in a way. How can we make that transition and make sure that there is accountability?
Yeah, so that's really good. And just to say, Monica, I think that's why I refer to the demoralization agenda, right, which is real,
Mm,
is that what they want to think is that we need a significant proportion of the population in order to restore things.
mm,
The reality is you actually only need, and I've been saying this from the beginning, maybe 2 people per million. And
mm,
it really is quite simple. So to just say the basis of what I'm going to say is that no one is above the law,
mm,
right? And that's why sometimes I give lectures on the history and the background to what's going on in a worldwide sense, in a 4,000 year sense, and in an immediate, we'll say 1,000 year, and then in the last 200 years. Because on the 11th, the 11th 2022, we did hold a lawful trial by jury in Ireland around the operation of the legal system in Ireland, and particularly going back to 1155 and the Papal Bull Laudabiliter, 1542 Crown Act, and the 1801 Unification of Ireland Act, which is just putting a historical context, right? So to answer your question though, and why I'm very glad you asked me, is that what I realize and what we've been doing in the World Freedom Alliance is that we need to show people how you actually restore the maxim of law that no one is above the law.
mm,
And once people know the system, they then can just decide, well, will I support it? So whether it is that they put their name or they decide they're going to set up a mediation system within their own county, or, in Sweden, which is just a free mediation service, right? Where we could decide, well, in Ireland, and I'd be very happy to train people through the Custodian Institute or whatever mechanism. We're actually meeting, having this already in Ireland now in 2024, is to teach people about how arbitration mediation works,
mm,
right? So that, but that is the fundamental cornerstone too, that no one is above the law, and that if someone is falsely accused, you can have a mechanism. So that's how the sovereign Dáil Éireann courts used to work, as I mentioned, right? In every small area in Ireland, they had a sovereign Dáil Éireann courts system within every parish, and it was all done by volunteers. So to answer your question then, in the world before the 1850s, there was no police force anywhere, no police force anywhere. And essentially, you didn't, the reason why you didn't have a police system was that everybody knew the law. And as it is today, every man or woman has an obligation in law to prevent harm there and then, because the law is just act in honor, do no harm.
mm,
Yeah, that's Dolores or Josephine, Dolores and Monica's obligation, and everyone's obligation everywhere, that we have to do no harm. And then that anyone who is in the system cannot infringe on our inalienable rights under the law, natural law, to life, travel, speech, privacy, and property. But the reason why there was no paid police forces in that way was that if anyone saw harm, they had to prevent harm. so that if someone was harming a child, no matter who you were, you had an obligation in law to step in and prevent harm. So you couldn't hit someone, but if someone was assaulting someone, you had the obligation in law to prevent harm, and everybody had the same power to prevent harm, which we would use the word arrest, you know? And
Mm.
that's why in law today, everyone has the same power to prevent harm, and they must prevent harm. So that's why I had an obligation in law to give the information, because if I didn't give the information about prevention and treatment, or about the dangers of the mRNA, which were researched for 20 years, that people would have been harmed, and the people in law that would be liable would be people like me if I didn't speak out. So I had an obligation in law.
Mm.
So then to go back to how does it work then, right? The trial by jury. So what we do is we develop a strategy, which we have worked through in Ireland, that you start doing precedences for individual men and women where the lawful remedy is that they either apologize, they correct their actions, or they do something like correct a fraudulent and falsified death cert. So that kind of thing would have a huge resonance in showing that individual men and women paid as civil servants or police cannot engage in fraud, because I worked in the School of Medicine. I'm not a medical physician, but I'm a researcher, and I was employed in the School of Medicine in pathology. The reason why a death cert and a coroner is so significant is that, for example, if you had food that was containing botulism, or a medicine where people were dropping dead, so-called medicine, after 15 minutes, why the reporting of the physician of the harm directly straight away and being accountable to report it, and the coroner and the pathologist, is so important is that if that was a product on the supermarket shelves and there was 2,000 tins containing something that would kill people, it makes complete sense that if the coroner and the physician are aware that there is something that's been given to people as a medicine or a food that's killing people, that the coroner has an obligation to ensure that the death cert is honest, and they have to communicate that, because they are literally preventing deaths the next day.
Mm.
So it's not about having a police force. Do you know what I mean? That in order to actually make people accountable, you just have to have one family where their loved one, which we have, literally was given an injection, where on video they literally sadly dropped dead as completely healthy 21-year-olds or 18-year-olds. And then that death certificate is a motorbike accident or cancer, right? For some people who are perfectly healthy. Now, the reason how you restore accountability is that you can have the first precedence of a trial by jury system would be to write to the family, then have standing, because they know that that was an incorrect death cert. And then it's a process of getting a few thousand people and saying, well, the people who have standing now for falsification of death certs can actually, in a loving way, write to the coroners and say, we are giving you an opportunity over the next month to write back to us and say, for whatever reason, that what you did, that death cert, was not lawful, not truthful.
Mm.
And then the options for them would be to apologize to the family, and apologize publicly, and then correct the death certificate over a period of like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Now, if they have options, so that's a bit like me instigating proceedings against the people who are paid as police, who have still warrants out for my arrest, like Dr. Anne McCluskey, for traveling to speak. Now, one of the travelings to speak was where I walked less than a mile to my local park. Yeah. But
Mm.
the thing is, all of those people are paid as police, as director for public prosecutions, and even the Supreme Court, and the registrars of the court system. So those warrants for my arrest, like Dr. Anne McCluskey, are live today in September 2024, which means that at any stage I could be put in prison today for speaking in 2020. And we now know that, sadly, and that's why I don't speak about this very often, because it's not something I,
Oh, sweetheart.
well, it's not something that I want to be right about. But the increase in deaths in Ireland is one of the most increase of deaths of any country in the world, and nobody is talking about them.
Mm.
Now, I don't mention that at all, and I have stopped speaking, obviously, about the deaths since 2021 because I was trying to prevent deaths in the future.
Mm.
But the deaths of the people that have taken the mRNA are astronomical,
Mm.
and there are deaths of children and people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and
Mm.
there are no media coverage of those deaths.
Mm. Mm.
So, in a way, why we don't need prisons, so I know, I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, is that when you see the maxim that no one is above the law,
Mm.
and that every civil servant and public servant, so just for people, this means people working in the Department of Health, working in the Department of Justice, working in the health service, working in the police. So it's probably like 50-60% of the people employed in Ireland, that they, if they want to, or we have a mechanism that they can be held to account by coordinating people through the country, which we're doing,
Mm.
teaching them. So this is initially an arbitration, mediation, dispute resolution mechanism where
Mm.
people whose loved ones have died, so this is an example of how you would do it, would then write in relation to a specific death cert to a specific doctor or a specific physician or
Mm.
a coroner who their loved one would be alive today if they either had my information and not taken the injection, or if the coroner wrote that the death was directly after, we'll say, an injection. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, 4 or 5 years later, those coroners have an opportunity today, the way University College Dublin have an opportunity, to come out when you have standing where people write to the coroner and say, are you going to further dig in when the deaths in Ireland are of the vaccinated population are very high and not the same in the unvaccinated population? For they as individuals then can say, I am going to apologize and not do that again, or they're going to say, no, it was definitely whatever, a car accident, right?
Oh.
And that then we individually in the legal system take high court proceedings, which
Mm.
we are now doing, like me and the families affected.
Yeah.
For that would have cost tens of thousands to take high court proceedings, but we're learning how to do it.
Mm.
Then
Mm.
we're actually challenging the system, because if the system says the coroners did not do anything wrong, then we can say the trial by jury system is higher, and there's
Mm.
also international courts that you can go to, that
Mm.
we can then say, well, we've given you as University College Dublin, as revenue, the tax authorities, as the police, as the coroners, the opportunity to apologize, to
Mm.
correct the death certs, and to say, and that would be a precedence for accountability.
Mm.
Or else we'll have to do it that we will then have the same proceedings, but do it through the arbitration mediation, where it's not the legal entity that's been challenged, it's actually the man or woman who did the injection. So their first name in the lawful language, they are innocent until proven guilty, and then the family can hold them accountable to have the system corrected lawfully, but you
Mm.
have a transparent process of trying to engage. So for the correction of the system,
Yeah.
you can do it to
And the
present.
transparency, I guess, as well, just to shine light on what is actually going on, because for people like you and me, it is heartbreaking. I completely understand it. And it's also so obvious how there are even proceedings in law all over the world, already against these very corrupt medicines that were rolled out, and the numbers speak very clearly, and still there's so much silence around it. And of course that breaks your heart to see. And like, also, I know we were going around together in having a tour in Scandinavia and England for last year,
Yeah.
and I remember meeting a nurse there that was a part of this whole circus, and where she in the end saw what she was doing, and she was devastated. She was completely so sad of being a part of that. And I think in the end, it's a relief for people to tell the truth, to not carry these lies, and knowing what you have been a part of. I think to actually come out and say, I'm very sorry, I was fooled, or I was, to declare the truth in this, and to give a chance to people, at least, to, like you say, to admit that this, I was a part of this. I'm deeply, deeply sorry. It won't happen again, is a part
Yes.
of this beautiful reconciliation, isn't it? At least to give
Yes.
that chance. And then if people are still in their illusion, in their, denial of looking at the statistics, the numbers, the clear facts of what is happening right and like in front of their eyes, you have to take another route, and just, you know
Yes, and I think one of the things is, so thank you, Monica, that's true. So, in a way, for people listening to this, even if we cut out this clip, of course, they will rightly say, I don't just want an apology. They don't, but that they want to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen again. And that's why many of our network. So, what people then, and I think that's what I'm now learning is, there's only a handful of people who know the next bit that I'm going to say, which is including you, Monica, but just this is the key bit,
Mm,
is that why were there so many deaths? People don't fully understand, and that's why you need to know the history of what's actually going on and how it works, and that it's a real thing. Because many people go to university, they think they learn the law, but they're actually learning a misrepresentation. It's like people who do a degree in history and they learn a version like of Irish history that is completely wrong, but they will
mm,
pass their exams and they will go on and use the textbooks. Do you know what I mean? So one of the things over 100 years ago, the people behind this have come out and said the lie would be so big that only 1 in a million people will see it and they will be thought insane, right? So when you know that they are hiding the truth, right, that they actually have done a lot of mechanisms within society to make it difficult. And this is the key information, that it's not just an apology that we're looking for, is that we're saying, well, we can offer you the arbitration mediation system through the the IRB sovereign Dáil and courts mechanisms that we are setting up now around the country, but that also we can challenge you within the legal system, right, within their system, which is what I'm doing, taking high court proceedings, which gives them another opportunity to challenge. But
mm,
the extra two components are that they hold the liability in law in their individual capacity.
mm,
And there are very few people in the world, but of course now we have like hundreds of people that we have been educating each other and have a network. But that if your name is, Tom Cullen, we say medical doctor or physician, and that you are in the legal system with the legal title Dr. Tom Cullen or Mr. Tom Cullen or whatever, that the barrister and solicitor networks And all the agents that use the title Mr. or Doctor are actually agents of a private business that's run out of the City of London. And that is a real thing, right? And that's why in the lower courts in Merck Sharp and Dome, that is actually part of the underpinning of the, like the way law versus legal, commodities versus securities, it's all part of a banking system based on trust, on
Mm.
trust. But what's the two key bits of information is that, say, if we have a guy, Tom Cullen, that he himself, Tom, is lawfully, he is a physician in law as well as a doctor in the legal system. And if he doesn't apologize through the arbitration, mediation, dispute resolution mechanism and give a remedy to the family, and if we can instigate precedence examples, as many people are doing against individuals now in Ireland in the legal system, that Tom still holds the liability, and his insurance policies and his regulator, like the financial regulator or the medical council, the council and the governors of the council, you know, the 12 on the council, they hold the liability in law, as does his insurance policy, and then as does Tom in a trial by jury system of like thousands of people, which we will reestablish in the years to come. So
Mm.
that in a way, it is going to take us a year or two to write to the medical councils, to the pensions ombudsman, to University College Dublin, to Revenue, to the Supreme Court, you know, the individual police, give
Mm.
them an opportunity to come out and say, apologize, correct the remedy,
Mm.
but then go be challenged in the legal system. They have the option to either say, okay, what we did was unlawful and apologize again. But otherwise, we can then make a claim from their insurance policies. And that is, many of us now have expertise to do that, or to
Mm.
hold them accountable lawfully, criminally. So what's happened in the last 2 years is that they know that this is going to happen, because so many families now are so shocked that their beautiful grandparents just dropped dead, or, you know, like in the one care home in Ireland, on one Saturday there was 51 of them, and 2 weeks later there was 19 coffins. And that all those elderly people and their families are obviously talking to each other going, that was in one care home,
Mm.
that was enough deaths, that was in January 2021, that should have stopped the rollout of these injections across the world. So the individual regulators, and we sent the death certs to every elected member of parliament with Health Freedom Ireland by March, April 2021, to make everybody give them the information. And we had multiple country statisticians
Mm.
show that the statistical significance is of something to be correlated is plus or minus 3 standard deviation units, and the correlation was over 30 standard deviations. So that why now this system, so the barristers, the solicitors, the people that were elected, all these guys, they have been protected by the legal system, the barristers, and the police in uniform coming up, intimidating individual whistleblowers, but our fathers and grandparents, you know,
Mm.
and deporting us as they did 100 years ago, or murdering people, right? But now, those individual civil servants and police are slowly kind of waking up, and the people who work in the departments and the nurses, that they now realize the tide is going out, and that there are hundreds of people that now know intimately how to hold them accountable. And so what I've been saying, which is and is true, is we just need to hold one civil servant accountable in one of the precedence examples within their system, for that to be a precedence case, that no one is above the law,
Mm.
and that individual civil servants who use the, we'll say, like the director of public prosecutions saying, for me to do my lawful duty to speak was an imprisonable offence. That
Mm,
is actually criminal malfeasance, right? So,
mm,
in a way, I have standing to show that University College Dublin had an obligation to analyze the debt certs in the care homes that I was giving to everybody, as our network was,
mm,
instead of trying to instigate criminal proceedings to silence me and censor me, and working in cahoots with the English police and the Irish police to put me in prison for up to 10 years.
mm,
You know what I mean? But in a way, they exposed themselves and they then wanted to use all of the arms that they had to ensure that I would be censored and silenced and intimidated, um, which the main thing then that we have to do, which you and I have been doing, is saying, well, let's just build a grassroots movement. Let's go around and visit thousands of people, as you and I have done over the last few years, and then just have a network. And that's the positive thing, is that we need to transfer, which we have done, the knowledge, right? So in order to take on countries and police and tax authorities and everybody, you need to put your own property in the law, and you need to put yourself in the law and your name in the law, and know a little bit. And because we now know that information, what we want to do is to pass it on to people who
mm,
themselves want to actually challenge one aspect, or that they want to start the enterprise entrepreneurial freedom economy in
mm.
order to give finances back to the people. Dr. Anne McCluskey is retired, but the people who have lost their livelihoods,
Mm.
in order that we then build a circular freedom economy that we can support each other.
Yeah, amazing, Dolores. And can you speak a bit more about that? Because I know maybe some people don't know that, but you have been a financial advisor, you have run successful businesses in your life, and actually know a lot about that aspect and how important it is that that is a part moving forward. Could you speak a bit more about what you're doing in that area now and why that is important?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Monica. So I suppose I set up my first company that was very successful in my early 20s. And then I got, I think, about 28 million or so funding from the system in order to develop diagnostic testing that was a more accurate diagnosis of people having a disease, but more importantly, a lot of people were misdiagnosed with having diseases. And because of my knowledge of the law, we were actually challenging back then that if a diagnostic test was fraudulent and inaccurate, that it shouldn't have been on the market.
Mm,
Because for example, I met the man who invented the prostate specific antigen PSA test, and he has spent like the last 15 years, including getting a cover of the New York Times, to ask for the PSA test to be withdrawn from the market. That because of it, for 1,000 men that were diagnosed with PSA as if they have prostate cancer, only one of those 1,000 will die from prostate cancer. 999 will be misdiagnosed, have operations and chemotherapy that they don't need. So
mm,
what I did, and I'm very grateful to that, was to develop an area of technology. And then because I knew the law, to challenge the regulators, the diagnostic system, the pharmaceutical industry in my 20s and 30s, to ensure that if people were diagnosed with something, that it was a true diagnosis, right?
mm,
So that was a very it required, like, we had robotic suites, so infrastructure was about 3 or 4 million to set up. And I did that in my labs in the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, and then in Protogen, my company in Dortmund, in the 90s. And then we set up an automated version of that and developed laboratory information management systems as a contract research organization to provide that technology and cut the cost of developing that technology. And then I set it up again back in Ireland. So the and then for the last 30 years as well, I was involved at many levels in Ireland, in Europe, in the world, in advising governments and research organizations and national and international budgets on to how to make effective use of budgets in education and in science. And as a voluntary role from 2004 for 10 years, I was on the Irish government's Science Advisory Council and was involved in helping them with large scale budgets. But I am very good at getting effective value out of money. And also, I then did some exams to be a qualified financial advisor and have expertise in regulations. And then for 25 years or so, I was hired as a consultant. It's called an expert in the European Union in order to assess European Union funding. So
Mm,
we get
mm,
grants of,
mm,
3 million grants or 80 million grants, but an area that I developed was looking at fraud and looking at where there was accusations of fraud from countries or universities, or misappropriation of funds. And then that's an area, and then I became one of maybe 10 innovation experts in the European Union for about 10 years on that. If people had got maybe 10, 20 million for whether what technologies or what areas would be important for all of Europe or the world, for key, and that involves analyzing technologies and whether they were really given benefit or not.
mm,
And then
mm,
I ended up being asked after the banking crisis. So I have a background as well and knowledge in banking and the legal banking system, and then the sovereign banking system and the history of banking and how to set up banking. And the Irish Republican Brotherhood actually, back 100 years ago, set up the policies around a land bank or a farmer's bank that was based on the Austrian and German banking model. And that is the absolute way to set up a banking system today. And I was supporting the People's Banking Forum of Ireland. And as you know, you've been involved in it. We've had a number of international meetings of bankers. And
mm, mm,
yeah, so I'm only just, and then I ended up, which was important for now, I was asked by the Irish government and Enterprise Ireland and the embassies in Brussels, because of my experience, to go on two very prestigious roles within the European Union. One was in the Unit for the Global Coordination of the World as a seconded national expert. And for that role, every country nominated somebody. So, there was 28 countries, 28 people, and I was chosen. And in that role, part of the expertise is that you get exposed to everything from banking to the marine to education, not just areas of law or medicine, but also some of the expertise of that role is if you have a collapsed nation due to a natural event or a war, the area of that unit where people who have the experience to recover failed nations in a
mm,
very quick way. So that's actually an area, and that's an area that I was working in that unit, but that I've actually focused on. So it is, how do you rebuild societies?
mm,
And so when I'm saying that once you have accountability, by these trial by jury, that's actually one of the very simple mechanisms to
mm.
restore everything in a country. So whether it's medical treatment or education or how the roads, the funding that goes to the roads, because essentially what we have is failed nations now, in a way. I call it chaos by design, right? So we've been living in this
And
United Nations.
traumatized, I think a lot of people that at least see clearly what's going on. It's like you say, you kind of impose trauma to like strengthen that confusion in people, like, am I wrong, or is this really happening? And you have this cognitive dissonance all
Yes,
the time that is very confusing. And like you said, like the empowerment and the entrepreneurship and trusting what you see and with your own eyes and
yes,
restoring that is, mm, like you're saying, must be the way forward, and not just not giving
yes,
energy to.
yes. But I think what it is as well, so you're exactly right. But I think the thing is, what I found is there's out of 100 people or 1,000 people, that actually there's only a small fraction of people that are comfortable with seeing the big picture. It's just
Yeah,
that people are born differently.
facing the truth. Yeah.
And even I've had the same conversations with Mick Stott, who knows, was in the military in the British Army at a very high level for 30 years. But
Mm.
when he saw people coming back from war 20, 30 years ago, he developed a program that helps people eliminate trauma based on a lot of evidence in psychology, right? But when I talk with him, he has educated me, right, as well. But, and obviously his lovely partner, Victoria, is that some people focus on the details, so they might be very good at accountancy in one small company, and you need those people, and they are brilliant at it. And other people can see the big picture, but couldn't actually, when they see the big picture as the problem or the solution, that they wouldn't know how to implement it in one school or one hospital. They might be able to implement it on a countrywide level or a worldwide level. And then there are some people, and I am one of those people, that can study and see the big picture. So that's why I work. That's why it's important that people know that I was nominated in Europe to go into the unit for the global coordination of the world. And we were in the unit between Asia and Europe, but the whole unit had sections for every continent. But that my background is also that I can say, well, to solve, you see the big issues, right, which we all see, that's a skill. And why I've come off of social media myself and not been doing interviews for the last year or two, is that when the United Nations Agenda 21, they want us to focus on the problem.
Mm.
And so there are many people who are just reiterating the problem with no solutions. So what my background is finding the solutions and then developing mechanisms that you can decide, or with evidence base, which solution is actually the best solution. So for example, we need solutions, we'll say, in detoxing people, in getting which is the best one, the best water filtration system. As an example, we need a banking system, and we need communication platforms that don't censor people. And we also need a system to provide products like mobile phones or banking systems or healthy food or water filtration systems that you and I and people in our leadership roles can develop the business model solution to make it profitable for people to either buy the water filtration system or access home education or access the best detox solutions, and that we have an iterative process to do landscape mapping and innovation assessment for which one lots of people might say they have the best system, but you and I and our networks now, it's not that difficult to do an assessment for which is the best water filtration system, what's the best model in home education, what's the best way to restore the nutrition capacity of farms. All of these things, they seem complicated, but there's the same system to actually provide the solutions. And that's what we were learning about in the unit for the global coordination of the world, is that whether you have a nation after war or after a disaster, it's actually very easy to go in and restore the system of education and health. You just have the same principles of honestly taking the evidence, defining a metric for whether the water filtration works or whether the education of the students, it's the best math system. It's actually easy to do, and then to communicate that. But the whole thing is underpinned by this accountability mechanism that no one is above the law. And if you fraudulently misrepresent the results of the water testing, or the banking system, right? If you've got people saying you cannot do barter or you cannot do X, Y, and Z, that you can assess that and challenge the people who are lying or misrepresenting. So so that's the combination of actually understanding finance and the processes of how countries work, and
Mm,
and not just seeing the problem but seeing the solution. And what I think what's really important now, Manika, that we do is that I think we need to bring people to co-ops like we have in Ireland, like the urban co-op in Limerick, and show them how it works,
mm,
and bring farmers to farms where they have diversified their income, and then bring people into health centers around Europe and say, this is how it works. So that
mm,
if they want to set up a farm or a co op or a health hub, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And in our network, that's what we're doing. And what I would like to do then is to spend my time passing on whatever information we have about law and the network that we have for people to buy their products, that we do that for people who are actively engaging in either volunteering or developing products or being the demonstration co-ops or health hubs across Europe and across the world.
mm. Oh, I'm so touched, Dolores. I mean, with your deep, deep knowledge and experience, and from your perspective, both of history and then in the different roles that you played during your life, I think, yeah, I'm just encouraging everyone, just listen to this woman. Like, just support Dolores in any way you can, because it's not just come, even though, some we discussed this the other day, just maybe answering emails or just small things, it might look small, but it's so big in the bigger picture of things. And those health hubs that you're supporting, and supporting other uh, entrepreneurs to bring more funds to the projects that need to happen. I know that we can just trust your view and trust where you're coming from, because I know it's coming from a deep love of the real law and men and women out there, and of really restoring humanity in a way. And it is that big, and we need to take that in. It is about restoring just us living in peace as men and women, right? It's the most easy thing. It should be the most easy thing. And and it is actually, but we need to remember that. We need to come back to it, I think.
Yes, and I think what it is, I think what it will be is that the maybe it's only 1 in 200 people who have a need, and that they will engage with us. And I think what I want to do is make it easier for people. So
Mm,
some people want to detox, or they want to find a farmer. Like if you were planning a pregnancy now,
mm,
right? You might say, well, I'm now making a conscious decision to buy my food from farmers who actively say they don't add poisons to the food. So I
mm,
think we're moving into a different era, right? Or if someone has a 3-year-old and they are absolutely do not want grooming of their children, they don't want 7-year-olds to be getting books that describe sexuality or whatever in the primary school education, will say under 11, that they then specifically want to know, well, where is the best home education system that I can do. So what I think, and why I think we need to, if we when we're having meetings, is invite people who have shown that they want to provide solutions, or they want to find solutions, that we
mm,
don't have to communicate to the 199 in this phase, because it's kind of sapping of our time and energy to
mm.
just be talking about the problem. So
Yeah.
we'll say out of 200 people, 100 people don't know there's a problem. In their world, everything is fine. So there's no point. And then for the other 100 people out of the 200 people, many of them are on a journey of being angry, but they haven't yet got to the stage that I can be part of the solution by deciding, well, I will buy a mobile phone, or I will invest in an internet, or I will, if someone has a startup on the blockchain, we'll say, that is an alternative to Facebook, that will not censor, that I will actually move my presence onto that platform in order to, by my action, support freedom of speech or accountability. So I think in the next, like 2024, 2025, we may only be in a network of hundreds of people who are saying, well, I want to set up a freedom B&B, or I want to, I will make the commitment that I will not close down. I will, I will not require masks in the future. I will not go along with any digital thing. I'll support cash. And that if we can support those people getting off the ground and having their first 100 people that stays on the farm or stays in the hotel, that we will, or people who open up their hotels to us, to have these freedom economy or inalienable rights economy to network with people, that's the phase that we're in. And then we, of course, will generously then give them all the information they need to know. And, that we have, we'll say, about the rights to your property and how you make an affidavit to assert your rights. Like, I was thinking a very practical thing to bring people in would be to have like 1-day courses to teach people how to do an affidavit, which is how you make your wishes known. And a practical affidavit would be that if you're ever in a hospital, that if you pre-write a lawful affidavit to say that you do not want to do not resuscitate, or you do not want an injection, that would be a 1-day course that would give people some very valuable information, but would also bring them into our network. But also at the end of the day, they would type up the affidavit, because if they had children or parents or whatever their wishes were, that they would take our knowledge, but at the end of the day, they would have an affidavit, and that they would give to their family members in the event that they're ever unconscious or in hospital, that their wishes are there. So I think we need to learn and provide the solutions. Like, I would love to have a mobile phone that was absolutely freedom of speech, and I would love to have an alternative, because I had a Twitter account with 11,000 people with Dolores Cahill and my name and photograph, that I've been trying for the last year or two to restore on Twitter, because I have the name of the volunteer and the email and the mobile phone number. And just yesterday, Twitter made the decision, or X, to not give me back the account, but to delete it. So in a way, that's another form of censorship. And obviously Facebook, I had one of the biggest accounts, having not been on social media in Ireland 7 times more than all the political parties put together. And that was taken down. Now I'm actually writing to Facebook and X and Twitter to get the data to see if there was any political decision influence in those decisions. But that what we really need is, a network, communication network, that we will not be censored, and that we will promote that with each other. So I think we are in a phase, Manika, where we need to gather the entrepreneurs. So I've heard it called the patriot economy, or like the freedom economy, that we need to gather and then say, well, the people who are really interested in promoting that economy by buying the food from the farmers or becoming a member of a co-op, and that might only be 1% of our network for now, and then we will grow it in the years to come.
Yeah, in a way, I mean, in the start, also with the World Freedom Alliance, we were shouting from the rooftops, and you did so much in spreading the word and being
As you
up
did.
there, like,
Yeah.
and everyone else involved, and you have to kind of remember that we probably reached, well, we did reach millions of people in that process. So we did our job there to, to spread the word. And now it's just a different phase of, now we know who are the kind of real people, like with also the feet on the ground, that have the big vision and the feet on the ground. And what we're doing now is just continuing the work of moving forward. And I'm happy to still, be working with you, going around. We're going to continue, like we say sometimes, like we're going to be the last one standing, whatever happens. And a lot has happened, and we're still standing, Dolores. And yeah, look out for that, because we do have plans to, I also have plans to coming to Ireland, to going around in different countries in Europe. And I'm really happy to meet together with you, to meet all those people that are serious about really taking that responsibility for the integrity and moving forward. Because I know in my heart that the spirit within us, like the truth within us, has always won in the end. You can also see it in when you see civilizations like rise and fall, it always wins in the end, the human spirit, the truth. Like it's just the illusion that dies, that you can be above the law. Like it never happens, never ever, like has it happened in the end in history, that the truth hasn't come out and the people has taken back their rights to their livelihoods, to their freedom in different ways. So I believe in that, and I know that you're doing exactly the right thing. So thank you. Thank you, Dolores, for everything that you're doing, and for offering your enormous expertise and knowledge to, and now to those people that really, step up together with you and move forward in
Yeah.
everything.
No, thank you. And of course, Monica, we wouldn't be, I wouldn't be where we are without you, right? And with all the people. So we do have to, I know you and I both are in touch with, we have core groups in the World Freedom Alliance and in the World Doctors Alliance, the World Freedom Alliance, and also in Freedom Travel Alliance, and in all the organizations that you have, Sweden Freedom, and in the water groups that we both are involved in. And many people have volunteered for many hours over the years. I think what this phase is, just to reiterate what you say, is I think what I've been saying for years is that if we had the momentum that we were in the last 10% of holding the last nurses and the last director for public prosecution or the last criminal people pushing, the Department of Agriculture pushing poisons, if we had 90% of the work done, everybody in society would row in for the last 10% because they would want to be on the winning team, right? They say the end is in sight, right? So what I think that's why it's good for us to understand the demoralization agenda and why they come after us every way is they want people to not have hope, and they want, and I think they actually have another layer of infiltration disruptors that just focus on the problem and no solutions, right? Or that the solutions are not in your home or in your community. They're all out there, some international organization or whatever. So, what I think is, and that's why I'm really glad to do this interview, is that for people to really get the message that the solutions are easy enough and that it just involves supporting precedents, examples of one coroner or somebody, um, one man or woman who is affected with criminal accusations, or like somebody being put in prison for actually doing the right thing. And that once civil and public servants realize that they are accountable criminally and hold the liability and their insurance policy, that the whole thing could actually change in a relatively short time frame.
Yeah.
And for us, we already are in the law. Everyone says to me, when is this going to end? But in a
Mm,
way, for me, it never really started because you and I, we knew we could travel and we didn't have to, we have jettisoned the lies,
mm,
and we probably, the entrepreneurial people are probably 1 in 10 of the population already. And what we're doing in a way, instead of just focusing on ourselves again, to say, well, look, we will reestablish with our small network and just work with people who actually are entrepreneurial, and are lawful, and we'll just carry on. That we're actually saying to people, well, if you're the next 10%, and you see a way that our knowledge can benefit you through
mm,
you detoxing or getting better water or learning how to assert your rights or a loved one's rights in the event that you are unconscious or in hospital, then please come and engage with us to come on the journey. And then through the knowledge, you might decide, well, I will actually support a co-op or support a farmer or a home education.
Mm,
And that together we actually resonate and provide the solutions that people want, and only open people's eyes when we have a solution in a way, and not increase the depression and the demoralization. I think that's our role now, is to actually
yeah,
say to
definitely.
people,
Mm,
this is, and that's part of the reconciliation process that I'm in as well. You know, this
mm,
peace, reconciliation, and prosperity. That prosperity is a good word. It's like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But I
mm,
think now this is the reconciliation phase, that people don't have to spend years digging into all the lies. They have to just in their own head think, well, is there a way to de traumatize myself? Can I get better water? Can I provide solutions for like pregnancy or death or care homes,
mm,
food, and just focus on that, and then decide for themselves to commit for their own lives, maybe 1 hour a week or 3 hours a month, like a hobby, and then just in a good way enjoy the process, you
mm.
know?
Yeah,
And I think,
exactly. And I think, I mean, over the years, we both experienced it. And I think a lot of people that were in the front lines that um, a lot of people come to you for advice or for help and that's the way it should be in a way. But now it's you have done such a deep work in like not just being on visible in that way, but actually finding the solutions so that we can say to people, well, if you learn this, you will be able to take care of it yourself. It's teaching people how to fish,
yeah,
instead of giving them fish, because you can't serve, like it's just like me in Sweden. A lot of people come to me and you get a quite clear understanding of the darkness of this country. I wouldn't even say all of it, like all I've heard it all. But with the mechanisms that we are actively working with and trying to be an example of, it goes so much deeper. It goes so much deeper into preventing this from happening again, and also letting people know that like if your mother or father died in a care home and it was very suspicious how they died or got the injection, these are the documents. This is how you can take charge of that. This is the process. To be able to offer that is much more long-term thinking than just saying like, take this document or do this or do that. Like then we could spend all of our time just do kind of putting out fires instead of not making the fires happen at all in the beginning.
yes. And then as well, I totally agree, Manik. And what I've realized is that in a way, you know, you have only so much time and I have so much time, that what I think now, and I haven't totally worked it out, is that we don't need thousands and thousands of people to do it. We just need to work with people. So even if people wanted to email at connect@custodianinstitute.com or whatever emails we have, that in a way we have deep knowledge, and the evil has ended for us because of the work generations of people have given us the knowledge. And
Mm,
we now have to figure out how we can pass on the knowledge. But I think the most effective that I would like to suggest is that people who are themselves either volunteering or have shown that they have built up communities, that they would contact us, and that we would then say, well, you to give something back for what you've done, or together we will work to share our knowledge. And
mm,
that through that we kind of build a network of people who are actively either doing it, or they're trying to build an enterprise to create jobs or to provide a product like a mobile phone or an uncensored internet or whatever it is, or a water solution, in order to improve, that comes with integrity, to improve the health or to compete against the people that are trying to censor us or whatever, and that
Mm,
we don't have to have a mass audience. We just have to say, well, we're working with people who are actively volunteering or actively providing solutions, and
mm,
that it will grow that way. And I think it will work, and I'm very happy with what we're doing. And I also know that in the next 5, 10, 20 years, that no one will be above the law, you know, and literally the coroners and the nurses and the police, those individual people will not get away with. There will be accountability mechanisms that will
mm.
be very
Yes, that is
key.
very important to know. Yes.
Yeah. And once you have that, you know, like people doing welfare fraud or people, like there is a lot of criminality going on in our countries that in cahoots, the police and the so-called people paid as justices and judges, and the regulatory mechanisms are allowing criminal and unlawful activity that are harming people, our communities, and our heritage. And that the people of our countries and the world are waking up to the criminal activity that is running rampant with the public and civil service and, you know, the mechanisms, and that will stop incrementally in the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. So it is the most amazing time to be alive, and there are hundreds of us as well. So before, many of us had death threats, you know, as you've had, or our families have been intimidated. But now, because of the grassroots work you've done and the World Freedom Alliance and the many organizations that we're involved with, that there are enough people now to say that criminality that is not being properly stopped in our communities, that that unlawful mafia type behavior will be addressed in the short number of years to come. And then the whole society will actually, it's easier for us to reorientate it in
Mm.
all levels. And it will not be as difficult as we think.
Oh, yay. I'm so happy for that, Dolores.
Thank you, Monica.
Yes, yes. And you are honestly, such a hero in that work. And I'm honored to work with you in all different areas that we work together. And I think, we could talk for hours and hours, but I think it's time to round it up and also to really share with people, like keep your eyes open and really see what you can contribute with, if it's just 1, 2 hours or if it's a deeper engagement in the different areas that you're working in, then you are so important in that. Like all of you are so important in that.
And
So
maybe just to end, Manik, again, to thank you very much and to thank you from the first moment that we met and for all your support. You have been the most loyal and supportive person of me and a real driver of the World Freedom Alliance. And I am forever grateful. And I'm so happy that I know we've always been working together, but that you're going to come to Ireland now in the autumn of 2024, and we're going to continue to support each other. So thank you, Manika, for all
yes,
you.
thank you. I actually remember the first time we met and we were speaking, and
Trafalgar Square, right?
yeah, after Trafalgar Square. And I remember the intensity of our discussions. We're like, oh my God, someone understands me straight away. I don't have to explain myself for 10 minutes and slow down. Like how I experienced it. It was like, you got it straight away. And you were like giving answers that I were just so brilliant straight away. I was so
And the
impressed
same for you.
with
So I think that's what's beautiful as well, as if we're going to build this new world, that a lot of people don't believe the undermining of education, you know, but when you actually have a group of people, we don't need to talk about how it's been undermined. We just flip to the solution. So I think that's
exactly.
what's beautiful with this
Yeah.
exchange and the network we have, Monica. So
Definitely. And
thank
I
you.
remember that conversation, how we actually talked about exactly what we're doing today, the importance of the grassroots and of having accountability on all levels in society, and how that was the solution moving forward. So in a way, We knew it already, and now we're actually implementing it and doing it. And I'm so grateful, Dolores, and
Thank
I'm
you.
sure we'll speak again and deepen into other things and really look forward to seeing everyone out there listening to this and, getting to know you and seeing how we can make all of this happen together. So thank you again, Dolores.
Thank you, Monica, and everyone listening. Bye bye.
Bye bye.